Okay, well, lofty dreams set aside, and reality sets in. One thing that also would be accomplished just by this whole thing, even if a dream is not fulfilled or anything like that, is that I'll finally get the whole book finished. I'll finally get the whole thing done, and it won't be haunting me for the, really bad. I was going to say, for instance, right before the very, very beginning, which if you look back at the first post that I made in this series was the music behind that was Goddamn, the Pusherman, but the original note that I made in the book here is My Back Page is by Bob Dylan. And this part is the reading part. I'll finish the story at least that I began last night, that I thought was shorter than that, but so Jeannie, who shared my love of books and words, would sit with me for hours and make up stories, write them down, and later we'd reread, edit, and modify them depending on our mood that day. Sometimes we wrote about our dolls, usually the exploits and escapades of Barbie and Ken. I do not believe Mattel would have approved of most of our storylines about their most infamous couple. Even at a very young age, we both were aware of the difference between men and women, and had the rudiments of sexual activity down from exposure to various stray cats and dogs in the neighborhood. Even though Barbie and Ken were far from being anatomically correct, their love affair was a lot more torrid than the manufacturers intended. We also wrote about the kids in the neighborhood. Anyone who had teased us that week were usually targeted to be killed in a most hideous and painful manner, sometimes their parents and siblings with them, if we were so inclined. Occasionally the parents would be spared, only to thank us for saving the world and themselves by ridding it of their obviously evil, ill-conceived offspring. My particular favorites, though, were the stories we wrote about a tiny family that lived in Jeannie's bottom drawer. We even cleared out the drawer and filled it with an elaborate array of dollhouse furniture and finds. Pretty rocks from the creek, bottle caps, empty spools, baseball cards. We then acted out the stories beforehand in hours of just pretend brainstorming, and then we wrote them down. The stories became quite adventurous as we had the family invade other rooms of the house, wreaking havoc in the kitchen or in Jeannie's sister Myra's room. Myra was a natural target for our little family's adventures, she being the sort of self-appointed leader of the teasing brigade that terrorized Jeannie and I. Usually our little family would sabotage her room in some way to cause embarrassment or minor harm to Myra and her snotty friends. In actuality, this never occurred, except in our imaginations, as her mother never let us have free rein of the house. Jeannie's mom was a slightly overweight, kind-faced, jovial woman who reminded me of the television maid Hazel, only with dark hair. She adored her two daughters and doted on them, and I adored her. She was so domesticated and sweet, and always had time to stop what she was doing and listen to our tall tales. I had an awful habit of saying, "Guess what?" before anything I was about to say, and she broke me of it by replying, "Turkey's trot," any time I started out that way. Later she would be Jeannie and I's Bluebird troop leader, and she taught us to cook. The #1 direction of every recipe is wash your hands, and do crafts and all sorts of fun things with us. She always had an idea of something we could do when we would come in and say pitifully, "We're bored." She was a neat nut. Her house was spotless, and she was always in a state of perpetual motion, trying to keep it that way. I loved the way Jeannie's house smelled, like washing powder and fresh air. My own mother wasn't the housekeeper Jeannie's mom was by a long shot. My mother married my father when she was barely 15. By the time she was 24, she had already given birth to all 5 of us kids. Neither she nor my dad were adequately equipped to keep pace with our reign of destruction at our house. But it wasn't just that we were so unmanageable, it was that she was grossly unprepared, and my father just expected her to know these things, innately. After all, in his view, it was just part of being a woman. I grew up knowing that the chores of women and men were clearly designated. Men were revered. Women waited on the men, and their main job was to take care of them, to ease their burden. Later this idea would screw me up totally as the world changed and I was suddenly expected to think independently. I wanted to be independent, but there was always this Donna Reed character screaming to get out. He didn't have the capacity to teach his child bride what he thought she should already know. Anyway, Jeannie and I would just pretend all morning, and once the story we were working on extended past the reality of her bedroom, we would lay back on the carpet, hands behind our heads, and spend the rest of the afternoon in what-ifs, with Jeannie playing stenographer for our musings. At night, as I lay in my own bed, I would think about our tiny family's adventures and happily drift off to sleep. I truly wish sometimes that I lived in her bottom drawer.